I didn't take this job because I loved the outdoors. That's the first thing I should make clear. Most people imagine a forest ranger as someone who grew up with a compass in one hand and a pair of hiking boots in the other. That isn't me. I took this job because I needed to get away from people, from noise, from everything that reminded me of how badly I'd failed. A tower in the middle of nowhere, high above the tree line, sounded like the perfect place to disappear. The listing had seemed almost too simple. Night watch, fire lookout, minimal duties, competitive pay, solitude required. That was it. No lengthy background checks, no tedious interviews, just a phone call, a signature on a few papers, and suddenly, I was the newest ranger assigned to Tower 4. I told myself it was fate giving me a reset button. The truth is, I didn't question why a job that paid this well was so easy to land. I should have. The drive out here was long enough to make me doubt whether I'd gone in circles. The road narrowed until it was little more than a scar through the trees, barely wide enough for my truck. Pine and spruce pressed in on both sides, their branches clawing at the glass when the wind picked up. My GPS gave up an hour before I arrived, leaving me with only an old printed map the station mailed me. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe they wanted it that way. When the tower finally appeared, it was like a needle rising out of the forest floor. 40 feet of steel and wood, crowned with a glass cabin that looked both inviting and impossibly small. My first thought wasn't how impressive it was, but how isolated. There were no nearby cabins, no ranger trucks, not even a supply shed. Just the tower and the trees. Miles of trees. Climbing the stairs made me dizzy. The structure groaned beneath my boots, each step ringing out into the silence. Halfway up, I paused to look back. The forest stretched in every direction, endless, shifting shades of black and green. I couldn't see the road anymore. I couldn't see anything except the wilderness. That was when I felt it for the first time, that subtle prickling on the back of my neck. The certainty that something was watching from below. I told myself, it was just nerves. It always starts with nerves. Inside the cabin, the air was stale, as though no one had opened the windows in months. A desk with a radio, a logbook, and a pair of binoculars sat against the far wall. The rest of the room was bare, except for a cot and a single locked drawer built into the desk. I rattled the handle, more out of habit than curiosity. It didn't budge. Taped above it was a note in thick, blocky handwriting. Do not open without clearance. I laughed nervously, but the sound didn't fill the room the way I expected. It just fell flat. As the sun went down, the forest changed. Shadows grew longer, stretching like black fingers across the treetops. The wind shifted, carrying with it faint, unrecognizable sounds. Not quite voices, not quite animals, just noise that made my skin crawl. I told myself I was imagining it, but I kept the radio close anyway. Old habits die hard. By the time darkness settled, I realized something strange. For all the emptiness of the forest, there were no stars. The sky above the tower was a flat, suffocating black, as if the trees had swallowed the light itself. I stared up for a long time, waiting for a pinprick to appear. None did. That was my first night in Tower 4. I didn't know the rules yet. I didn't know what had happened to the ranger before me. But as I lay on the cot listening to the glass rattle in the wind, I already felt the weight of something pressing in from the trees. Watching, waiting. I wasn't alone my first day on the job. The man who dropped me off didn't give me his name, and I didn't ask. He wore the ranger uniform like it belonged to someone else. Wrinkled shirt, faded patches, boots that looked 20 years old. He had the kind of face you couldn't hold in your memory, like your eyes slid right over him, even while you were staring. When I offered to shake his hand, he just nodded once and turned toward the tower. "This is where you'll be," he said flatly. "Tower 4. His voice was calm, but there was a scratch to it, like someone who smoked too long or screamed too often. "You'll be up here alone most nights. Don't worry about visitors. We don't get those. I asked him how many other rangers worked nearby, just to make conversation. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he climbed the stairs ahead of me, his boots clanging on the metal. When he finally spoke, it was without looking back. There used to be more. Not anymore. That was the first time I thought about quitting before I'd even started. But I followed him up, because I needed the paycheck, and because part of me still clung to the fantasy that this was just another boring job. Inside the cabin, he walked me through the basics: the radio, the logbook, the binoculars. He didn't touch the locked drawer, and I noticed he kept his distance from it, like it carried a smell only he could sense. After the formalities, he handed me a folded sheet of paper. Creased so many times the edges were soft. You'll need these more than anything else, he said. I unfolded it. At the top, written in the same blocky handwriting I'd seen taped above the drawer, were the words, "Rules for Tower 4. I thought it was a joke at first. Then I read them. Rules for Tower 4. Do not leave the tower after midnight, no matter what you hear. If you see movement in the treetops, do not use binoculars. Looking too closely invites attention. Keep the cabin windows shut after sundown, even if the air grows stifling. If the radio crackles but no one speaks, turn it off immediately. Wait 1 full minute before turning it back on. At 3:13 a.m., exactly write your name in the logbook. Do not skip this. If you hear footsteps on the stairs, announce aloud, 'Tower 4 is occupied.' Do not open the door when the sun rises. Check the forest for smoke. If you see more than one column, report only the nearest." I laughed under my breath. Is this some kind of hazing thing? His expression didn't change. Read them again. Slower. Something in his tone cut through my amusement. I obeyed, my eyes moving line by line, the words sinking in like stones. The longer I looked at them, the less funny they seemed. They weren't written like guidelines. They were written like warnings. Why? I finally asked. He sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the floorboards. For a long moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he did, his voice was quieter than before, because the forest doesn't sleep, and neither does what lives in it. I felt a chill ripple through me. What lives in it? You'll know soon enough. He stood, adjusting his belt like the conversation was over. I wanted to press him, but there was something final in the way he moved, like he'd given me as much as he was willing. Before leaving, he added one more line that wasn't on the paper. He paused at the door, hand resting on the knob, and said, without turning, "If you ever forget a rule, the forest will remind you, but you won't like how." Then he was gone, boots clanging down the stairs, his figure swallowed by the trees. I leaned out the window to watch him, but by the time I blinked, he was nowhere in sight. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. I tried to distract myself by organizing the desk, flipping through the old logbook, setting up my cot, but the list kept pulling at my mind. Every time the wind rattled the glass, I thought of the third rule. Every time I glanced at the binoculars, I thought of the second. I couldn't stop imagining situations where I might have to follow them. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, I shut the windows. The air inside thickened almost immediately, hot and heavy, but I didn't dare crack them open. I set the paper on the desk beside the radio, careful not to lose it. The forest grew darker, deeper, until the trees were only shapes moving in the wind. I thought I saw something sway against the current, a ripple in the canopy that didn't belong. My hand twitched toward the binoculars, then froze. My pulse thudded in my throat. The rules weren't funny anymore. I forced myself back to the cot, staring at the ceiling until my eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the desk lamp. That was when the radio crackled. A burst of static, sharp and sudden, like a breath drawn through teeth. No voice followed. My heart pounded. Slowly, I reached over and clicked the switch off. The silence afterward was worse. I counted in my head, 10 seconds, 20, 30, a full minute. Only then did I turn it back on. Dead air. I leaned back, staring at the paper again, the edges trembling in my hand. These weren't superstitions. They were survival instructions, and I had just followed one. The night stretched long. I never heard the man leave in his truck. I never saw headlights on the road. For all I knew, he'd walked into the forest and vanished. As the hours crept past, I realized something chilling. The rules weren't there to keep me safe. They were there to keep something else out. The first time I slipped, it was almost by accident. I had been staring at the rules for hours, my eyes tracing each line until the words blurred. I told myself I wouldn't break them, no matter how ridiculous they seemed. But fear works in strange ways. Sometimes the very act of being told not to do something plants the idea so firmly in your mind that resisting it feels impossible. It was just past midnight, the dead center of the silence, when it happened. I had closed the windows like I was supposed to, though the heat inside was suffocating. My shirt clung to me, damp with sweat. Every breath felt heavy, like I was inhaling through wet cloth. I lay on the cot, restless, unable to sleep. That was when I heard it. The sound was faint at first, drifting through the glass like a whisper too soft to catch. A pattern of movement, branches creaking, leaves shifting. But then it sharpened, clearer, more deliberate. Footsteps. They were climbing the stairs. My body froze. The wood moaned under the weight of something heavy, one step at a time, slow and patient. I remembered the rule immediately. If you hear footsteps on the stairs, announce aloud, "Tower 4 is occupied." Do not open the door. My throat felt dry. I sat up, staring at the door, every nerve in me screaming to move. The footsteps paused halfway, as though waiting. I forced the words out, my voice trembling. "Tower 4 is occupied." The silence that followed was unbearable. No wind, no movement, just stillness pressing against the walls. Then the steps resumed, heavier this time, climbing higher, until they reached the landing just outside the door. The knob rattled once, softly, then stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the weight shifted away. The steps descended slowly, fading into the forest below. I stayed frozen on the cot, every muscle screaming, with tension. Finally, when I was sure it was gone, I exhaled. That was when I made the mistake. Curiosity pulled at me like a hook. I told myself it was nothing, just an animal, maybe a bear or elk wandering too close. The rule was just a precaution, nothing more. I needed proof, something to quiet the voice in my head. So I stood, against every instinct, and stepped to the window. I shouldn't have looked. The forest below was black, the tree line shifting with the wind. But just at the edge of the clearing, I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, its limbs thin and uneven, like branches, broken and reattached. Wrong? It stood perfectly still, staring up at the tower. Even from that distance, I felt its gaze. A cold pressure, like ice sliding under my skin. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the cot frame. When I looked again, it was gone. No movement, no sound, just the trees, swaying as if nothing had been there at all. My pulse hammered in my ears. I clutched the edge of the desk, staring at the rules, rereading the second one. If you see movement in the treetops, do not use binoculars. Looking too closely invites attention. But I hadn't seen it in the trees. I'd seen it on the ground. The loophole gnawed at me. My hand drifted toward the binoculars anyway, trembling, ready to lift them. If I could just be sure of what I saw then. The radio crackled. Not the soft static from before. This was sharper, louder, a jagged burst that filled the cabin with white noise. I jumped, knocking the binoculars back onto the desk. The sound ended as suddenly as it began, leaving the room hollow and ringing. I didn't turn it off this time. I couldn't move. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt aware. Slowly, I sat back on the cot, pulling the thin blanket over me, even though the heat still smothered the air. I kept my eyes shut, forcing myself to breathe evenly, pretending I could sleep. But sleep never came, because in the silence, just beyond the glass, I could hear it still. Not footsteps now, not movement in the trees, breathing, a slow, heavy exhale. That matched the rhythm of my own, as though something outside the window was waiting for me to forget the rules again. The night after the footsteps, I tried convincing myself I had imagined it. Maybe stress had played tricks on my ears. Maybe the figure I thought I saw was nothing more than a shadow stretched wrong by the moonless sky. But deep down, I knew better. The rules weren't a joke. Something in the forest had heard me, had tested me, and I had only barely passed. I clung to the paper more tightly after that. Every time my eyes drifted to it, I reread each line as though repetition might tattoo them into my bones. Still, the weight of curiosity pressed against me. I wanted to know what lived out there, what required rules this strange to keep at bay. The answer came 2 nights later. It was around 1 in the morning. I was sitting at the desk with the lamp turned low, sketching rough outlines of the tree line in the logbook, just to stay awake. The windows were shut, but the heat was suffocating again. Sweat gathered on my neck, dripping down my back. I wanted to open the glass, just for a sliver of air. But the memory of the breathing outside kept me pinned in place. That was when I noticed movement. At first, it was subtle, a ripple in the canopy, a quiver of branches. I thought it was wind, until I realized the rest of the forest was still, perfectly still. My chest tightened. The second rule came to mind at once. If you see movement in the treetops, do not use binoculars. I told myself I wouldn't, but the longer I stared, the clearer the movement became. Something was weaving between the treetops, not climbing like an animal, but gliding, as if the trees bent willingly to its passing. My hand hovered over the binoculars. A war waged inside me. Follow the rule, or satisfy the gnawing need to know. In the end, knowledge won. I raised the lenses to my eyes. The forest leaped into focus, each branch sharp against the night. I swept the glass across the canopy, searching, my breath shallow. Then I found it. A shape moved through the treetops with impossible grace. Its body was long, stretched, segmented like an insect's, with too many joints bending in too many directions. Its skin, if that's what it was, shimmered like bark and shadow combined. What froze me most wasn't the body, but the head, or the absence of one. Instead of a face, it had a hollow, yawning gap, a void that seemed to drink the light from the lenses. The moment I saw it, the binoculars grew cold in my hands. A piercing chill bit into my fingers, spreading up my arms. My heart lurched, panic flooding me. I yanked the binoculars away, gasping, but it was too late. The thing had stopped moving. It was still now, crouched high above the clearing, its hollow void angled directly toward me. Even without eyes, I knew it was looking. The glass rattled in the windows as if shaken by a sudden wind. The lamp flickered. My skin prickled with the sensation of being seen, dissected, understood. I stumbled back from the desk, heart hammering. The rules hadn't been warnings against inconvenience. They were shields, and I had just torn one down. For long minutes, I didn't move. The forest outside remained silent, but I could feel it watching. My instincts screamed at me to hide, though I knew there was nowhere in the cabin to go. Finally, desperate, I grabbed the rule sheet and clutched it in both hands like a talisman. That was when the radio came alive. A voice, not static, not noise, but a voice, low, distorted, whispering, "I see you." The sound froze my blood. I slammed the radio off, then staggered back until my spine pressed against the far wall. My breath came in ragged gasps, and for a long time I thought I might faint. Eventually, The silence returned. The lamp steadied. The windows stilled. But the forest didn't feel empty anymore. It felt crowded, as if something vast and hungry crouched just beyond my sight, waiting for me to slip again. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even sit. I just stood in the corner, trembling, staring at the rules. And though I was alone in the tower, I couldn't shake the sensation that if I dared glance toward the treetops again, I would see that hollow void still fixed on me, patient as stone. After the treetop thing, I knew I had to stop treating the rules like curiosities. They were boundaries, thin walls holding something back. But walls can be studied. If someone had written these rules, then someone else had lived through them before me. And maybe, just maybe, they left something behind. The logbook on the desk was my first lead. At first glance it looked like nothing more than records of weather, smoke sightings, and dull patrol notes. But as I flipped back through the yellowing pages, I noticed patterns. Entire weeks where the entry stopped abruptly, then resumed in a different handwriting. Margins filled with small scribbles that weren't official, notes skinny arrows pointing. 2 blank spots, circles drawn around certain hours. One page in particular caught my attention. Dated 7 years earlier, the entry began normally, clear skies, no smoke, wind out of the east. But beneath it, in smaller writing, someone had added, "If you hear them under the tower, don't move. They can't climb without permission." It wasn't part of the official record. It was a personal warning. I kept flipping. More notes appeared the further back I went. Some were crossed out violently, others half erased, as though someone didn't want them found. Do not answer if they call your name. Never look at your reflection after 4 a.m. The drawer stays locked. Don't ask. That last one made my stomach turn. My eyes slid to the desk. The drawer I'd tested on my first day. The one taped with the warning. For hours I sat, with the book open, debating. The rules had kept me alive this long. But rules without reasons were chains. I needed to know what I was dealing with. The opportunity came sooner than expected. It was late afternoon when I found the key. I'd been shifting the cot to sweep dust from beneath it when I noticed a nail sticking up from the floorboard. Tugging at it loosened the plank, revealing a narrow gap. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a small brass key. My hands shook as I held it up. It was the perfect size for the drawer. The rational part of me screamed to put it back, to pretend I hadn't found it. But curiosity had been gnawing at me too long. My pulse thundered as I slid it into the lock. The drawer opened with a reluctant click. Inside were stacks of papers, most brittle with age, old log sheets, maps, and something else, loose notebook pages written in frantic, slanted handwriting. I pulled them out carefully and began to read. The first page was simple. "If you're reading this, I'm sorry. That means you're next." My skin crawled. The notes were from the ranger before me. His name never appeared, but his voice bled through every line, desperate, exhausted, unraveling. He described the first weeks in the tower, much like mine, odd noises, unsettling encounters, then steady escalation. But unlike the official rules, his notes detailed what happened when they were broken. One entry read, "Left the window cracked one night. Woke up with soil on the floor. Prints shaped like hands but too long. They don't like barriers." Another, "Didn't write my name in the log. Something whispered all night from under the bed. Said it knew me now. Next morning the glass wouldn't show my reflection." The further I read, the worse it became. He mentioned the figure in the treetops too, describing it as a hollow feeder. According to him, once you looked directly at it, it never lost you. But the most disturbing entry was near the end. They made me a choice: stay in the tower, follow their rules, and survive as long as they let me. Or step outside, leave the post, and join the forest. I don't know what that means, but the others who left never came back. Maybe they became part of it. Maybe they still are. The last page was smeared, the ink running where water or tears had blurred it. Only one line was clear. Don't trust the one who gives you the rules. He's not what he seems. I sat frozen, the paper trembling in my hands. The man who had dropped me off, the one who handed me the list, wasn't just a ranger, at least, not anymore. As the sun sank, I spread the pages across the desk, piecing together what little lore I had. The forest wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Not with animals, not with spirits, but with something older, something that demanded bargains. The rules weren't random, they were offerings, gestures of obedience to keep whatever lived out. There from crossing the threshold, I thought of the footsteps, the breathing, the void in the trees. They weren't isolated, they were part of a system, a ritual, and I was trapped in the middle of it. That night, at 3:13, I wrote my name in the log with hands shaking so badly the letters slanted across the page. When the radio buzzed an hour later, I snapped it off immediately, counting the seconds with clenched teeth. Every act felt less like survival and more like worship. As dawn finally broke, I looked down at the forest, the endless green swaying under the first light. I tried to imagine how many rangers had stood where I stood, how many had followed the same rituals, written the same names. The tower wasn't a job post, it was an altar, and I was just the latest sacrifice asked to tend it. The forest gave me 3 quiet nights after I uncovered the notes. Almost too quiet. I followed the rules to the letter, windows locked, radio silenced at the first crackle, binoculars left untouched on the desk. Every action felt mechanical, rehearsed, but the silence pressed harder with each passing hour, until I realized it wasn't safety. It was waiting. On the 4th night, it stopped waiting. It began with the air. I was sitting at the desk. The lamp dimmed when I noticed the room felt heavier. My breaths came shallow, as though the oxygen had thinned. My ears popped like I was underwater. Then came the sound. A low, steady groan rolled through the trees, deep enough to rattle the glass. It wasn't wind. It was a voice. Not words, but something deeper, an ancient vibration that seemed to vibrate in my chest cavity. I staggered to the window, half in fear, half in instinct. At first, I saw nothing. Then the tree line moved. The trees weren't swaying in the breeze. They were bending. All of them, at once, bowing toward the tower, as though pushed by an invisible hand. Their tops angled closer, closer, until they arched over the clearing like ribs enclosing a cage. The rules screamed in my head, don't leave the tower, don't look too closely. But I couldn't look away. That was when the first light appeared. It flickered in the dark, deep between the trunks, a soft, pale glow, like a lantern carried by unseen hands. Then another, then a dozen. They floated toward the tower in silence, weaving between the bent trees. For one dizzy moment, I thought they were fireflies. But fireflies don't carry shapes inside them. The glow passed close enough for me to see faces, dozens of faces, faintly illuminated in the lights. Eyes closed, mouths slack, their features half dissolved, as if drowned. They drifted through the trees like balloons tethered to invisible strings. One of them floated higher, brushing against the branches. Its eyes snapped open. They were human eyes. They locked onto mine through the glass. I stumbled back, my hand smacking the desk. The radio hissed alive, bursting with static, then a chorus of voices overlapping in a grotesque harmony. They all whispered the same word, stretched and broken: join. The lights pressed closer to the base of the tower. One by one, they circled the stairs, illuminating the clearing in a ghostly glow. Shadows stretched up the walls of the cabin. I knew what would come next. Footsteps. They began to climb, slow and deliberate, boards creaking under their weight. But these weren't the heavy steps I'd heard before. These were lighter, quicker, like multiple sets of feet scrambling at once. I forced my voice out. hoarse and shaking. Tower 4 is occupied. The steps paused. The voices on the radio cut out. For one heartbeat, I thought it had worked. Then, the knob rattled. It twisted violently, jerking back and forth, the metal groaning. Something scraped against the doorframe, nails or claws dragging across wood. The whole cabin trembled as the weight outside pressed harder. I grabbed the rule sheet in one hand and the logbook in the other, clutching them like armor. My mind screamed to hold the door shut, but the rule didn't say defend. It only said not to open it. The assault lasted minutes, maybe longer. Time bent under the pounding of my heart. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The stairs creaked, again this time descending. The lights drifted away, dissolving into the tree line, but I wasn't safe. I knew it because the room was still cold, still pressed under that suffocating weight. I turned slowly toward the window. Something was there, not outside. Inside it hovered. In the corner, a darker patch of shadow than the rest of the room. Long, thin limbs bent at wrong angles, unfolding slowly as it rose to its full height. It had no face, only that yawning void where a head should have been. The hollow feeder. I froze, lungs locked. The rule sheet slipped from my fingers. It didn't move toward me. Instead, it leaned closer to the window, its void angled outward, gazing at the forest as though I weren't even there. Then, in one impossible motion, it snapped its body backward, folding through the glass without shattering it. Vanishing into the night, I collapsed to the floor, gasping, every muscle trembling. The rules had saved me again, but not because I understood them, only because I obeyed. When dawn came, I expected relief. Instead, the clearing was different. At the base of the tower, in the dirt, were footprints. Dozens of them, bare, human feet, circling the stairs like dancers in some ancient ritual. And in the center of the circle, burned black into the soil, was one word: join. I didn't expect to see the old ranger again. After the first night, I thought he'd vanished for good. But a week after the encounter with the lights and the footprints, he appeared at the base of the tower as though he'd stepped out of the trees themselves. I spotted him just after dusk. No engine noise, no headlights, just a figure standing in the clearing, staring up at the cabin. The fading light caught his uniform, the same rumpled shirt and worn boots, but there was something off. His posture was too stiff, his head tilted too far back, like a puppet waiting for strings. When I descended halfway down the stairs to meet him, he didn't wave or call out. He only said, "You read them, didn't you? The notes in the drawer." My throat tightened. "You left them there." He shook his head slowly. Not me. Him before me. And before him, another. Always another. I gripped the railing, fighting the urge to retreat. "What are you?" His expression flickered, like a glitch in a video feed. For an instant, his eyes were wronged too dark, too wide. Then they were normal again, and he smiled. It wasn't reassuring. "I'm what you'll be, if you stay." The words chilled me more than any rule, any monster. "You're saying you work for them?" He laughed softly, but the sound was hollow, dry. "Not work. Serve. The tower isn't a job. It's a bargain. You keep their rules, you last a little longer. Break them, and they take you. But eventually, even obedience isn't enough." Pieces of the notes clicked into place. The warnings about choices, about joining the forest. I stared at him, horrified. "That's what happened to the others." He nodded once. "The lucky ones were taken quick. The unlucky," his smile stretched too wide, splitting into something sharp, "learned to write the rules." My stomach turned. This man, this thing standing before me, wasn't just a mentor. He was a survivor who'd traded everything to keep breathing. "Why me?" I asked. "Why bring me here at all?" "Because the tower needs a keeper, and when one of us has lasted too long, we bring another to take our place." His voice softened, almost kind. "You're not the first I've left here. You won't be the last." The realization hit like a blade. He hadn't saved me. He hadn't prepared me. He had chained me to the altar so he could walk free. Anger rose through my fear. "You said if I follow the rules, I'll be safe." I said, "You'd survive." "That's not the same thing." The air thickened between us. Behind him, the tree line shivered, though no wind blew. I thought I saw faces in the shadows, pale and blurred, waiting, watching. He stepped closer to the stairs. "You've seen them now. You've felt them. You're marked. There's no going back to who you were. But if you want to last, you'll do as I did. You'll serve." My grip tightened on the railing until my knuckles ached. "And if I don't?" His eyes flicked upward, toward the canopy. For a heartbeat, the void from the treetops shimmered above him, a hollow shape bending the light. He smiled again, softer this time, almost pitying. "Then they'll join you to the forest, and you'll beg for rules you no longer have." With that, he turned and walked into the trees. No sound of boots against dirt, no breaking of branches, just a slow fade, his body dissolving into the darkness like smoke. I stood there for a long time, paralyzed. The truth unraveled around me, sickening and undeniable. The rules weren't gifts from a mentor trying to help me survive. They were chains, passed from one doomed soul to the next. The man who'd given them wasn't my savior. He was my jailer. And now, I was next in line, after the ranger vanished into the trees. I knew the truth. I wasn't guarding the forest. I was feeding it. Every rule, every ritual, was a morsel tossed to something ancient and patient. And when the rules failed, when obedience wasn't enough, I would become the next offering. The thought made sleep impossible. I spent my nights pacing the cabin, replaying his words in my head. "You'll serve." The phrase became a noose, tightening each hour. I couldn't let that be my fate. But escape wasn't simple. The first rule was clear: do not leave the tower. After midnight, that left only the day. I considered walking out when the sun rose, following the road until I found civilization. But every time I looked down from the tower, the road was gone swallowed by trees that hadn't been there the day before. The forest shifted itself to keep me here. That left one option: breaking the rules. Not just bending them, but shattering them completely. If the rules were chains, then ignoring them might be the only way to fight back. But the notes warned of consequences. Faces at the windows, breathing in the dark, things worse than death. Still, I couldn't stay. The chance came on a night thick with silence. No footsteps, no lights, no radio crackle. The forest was waiting, testing me. I sat with the paper in my hand, staring at the words until my vision blurred. Then, with a trembling breath, I crumpled it. The rules fell to the floor. The cabin shifted. Instantly, the glass quivered, the lamp flickered, and the air grew heavy with static. I whispered to myself, "I choose," and swung the window open wide. The night air poured in, cool and sharp. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt the breeze against my skin. But it carried more than air. It carried whispers, soft voices, rose from the forest, dozens layered together, murmuring in languages I didn't understand. They braided into one sound, beckoning. The trees leaned closer, their branches extending like arms. Then came the footsteps, not from below, but from inside the cabin. Behind me, I spun. The shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, peeling away from the walls. They gathered, folding upward, limbs bending, until the hollow feeder stood before me. Its void angled toward the window I had dared open, as if curious whether I would leap into its waiting arms. I forced my legs to move. I grabbed the logbook, the one constant in this nightmare, and tore a page free. At 3:13, instead of writing my name, I wrote a single sentence: "I refuse." The shadows recoiled, twisting violently, the feeder's void flaring like an open wound. The whispers outside turned to screams, rattling the glass so hard I thought it would shatter. I bolted for the stairs. Every step groaned, threatening to give way. Below, the clearing was no longer empty. The glowing faces drifted in circles, dozens of them, their eyes open and locked on me. The ground burned faintly, with symbols I couldn't read. I kept running. The voices rose to a fever pitch, screaming, begging, commanding, join, obey, stay. The air pressed against me like a wall, but I shoved forward, staggering down the final steps and into the dirt. The forest swallowed me instantly. Branches clawed at my skin. Roots coiled around my ankles. Shadows bent in impossible shapes. But I didn't stop. I pushed through, gasping, bleeding, breaking the rules with every frantic step. And then, for the first time, the trees thinned. The road appeared ahead, pale, under the moonlight. My chest nearly split with relief. I stumbled onto the asphalt, collapsing to my knees. Behind me, the forest seethed, its treetops writhing like a nest of snakes. The feeder stood at the edge of the trees, its void fixed on me. It didn't cross. It only watched. For the first time, I felt something shift. Fear, not hunger, but recognition. I had broken their chains. I had chosen. But as I rose and staggered down the road, one thought curdled in my gut. The rules hadn't kept me safe. They had kept me contained. And now that I was free, I had no idea what followed me out. I don't remember how long I walked. Hours, maybe. The moon traced its arc overhead, the asphalt stretching endlessly beneath my feet. No headlights, no houses, no sign that the road ever ended. Only the steady crunch of my boots and the silence pressing on my ears. By dawn, exhaustion gnawed at me. My throat burned with thirst. My legs shook with every step. When the first glimmer of sunlight broke the horizon, I thought I'd finally made it. The forest behind me shrank into the distance, its canopy glowing gold. Relief washed over me. I noticed the shadows. They weren't moving with the trees. They were moving with me. Each step I took, the shadows followed, stretching toward my heels, clawing at the pavement. My pace quickened, but the sun didn't chase them away. They only grew longer, sharper, as though the daylight itself couldn't reach them. By noon, I saw it. A shape on the horizon. A structure cutting against the sky. My chest clenched as I recognized it. A tower. Not the one I had fled. Another. Identical, in every way. Standing sentinel over another stretch of endless trees. Its windows glared down like empty eyes, waiting. I froze, my breath catching. The road bent toward it, no matter how far. I walked. The forest loomed on either side, whispering, laughing. I realized the truth then. I hadn't escaped. I'd only been moved. The logbook still dangled from my hand, pages fluttering in the breeze. I opened it, desperate, and found the last entry already written in a hand that wasn't mine. Tower 5. Keeper. My name. Duration. Until replacement. The pen dropped from my fingers. I stood at the base of the new tower, staring up the stairs that led into shadow. My body ached. My mind begged me to run, but my feet betrayed me. One step, then another. Each board groaned, the same as before. At the top, the door waited. My hand hovered over the knob, trembling. I whispered to no one, to everyone. I chose. The knob turned anyway. Inside, the cabin looked the same. Same desk, same lamp, same drawer, holding the rules. Folded neat, as if waiting. I opened it. The paper was blank at first. Then words bled up through the fibers like ink rising from the dead. The rules, the same chains I thought I'd broken. My eyes caught the first line, and my heart iced over. Welcome, new ranger. Your shift begins at midnight. Behind me, the door clicked shut. The air thickened. The shadows stretched long across the floor, bending toward me like fingers. I dropped into the chair, staring at the page, my pulse drumming in my skull. The forest whispered outside, eager, patient, and for the first time, I understood. You don't escape the tower. You only move closer to the center.